speaking about binary economics as being more consistent with Christianity than the conventional approach to economic theory. So.
Right. No, I would like to do another show with you on that, because I was thinking about it this morning. I mean, I was even thinking about the sacrifice of Abraham and human rights. I mean, what gave Abraham the right to do what he did to his son? It's a very deep topic. And what does ownership mean? What does it mean to own anything, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a very deep topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Rabbit Hole Central.
No. Yeah, rabbithole.central.tv.
Mm-hmm. Someday I'm going to get a webcam.
Oh, you've got a webcam?
Oh, say someday I'm going to get a webcam.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I see someone there. I see you.
You see me?
I see you. You're not moving. I just see a face of you.
Oh, try again. Oh, no, hit on the rabbit to get on the stream.
Okay. The black box right now. Obviously, there we go. There's the picture. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's...
let me just start. I guess I better turn off the feedback.
Yeah.
Do that. For the people who are just coming to the first time or want a little bit of a refresher, binary economics is one of those ideas that is kind of a new flash if you've never seen it before. And I always show this picture of two faces looking at each other, and then you look at it again, and there's a vase in the middle. So imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if you were in a society that had never seen a vase before, you showed that picture to people. It would, even the most educated person might not imagine the vase in the middle, but some person with a creative leap might do it. And that's sort of the basic notion of binary economics. It looks at the world and sees things in a very different way. And the other thing that I often say is that every morning we see the sunrise and every evening we see the sunset, but it's a complete illusion. It's just the Earth spinning, and the sun isn't rising or setting. And so it's sometimes we have these illusions that dispel and confuse us that have to be dispelled. The basic notion of binary economics, it stands for the idea that the human factor of production, which is labor, and the non-human factor, which is everything that's not human, that both of these factors do work in the same way. They are, in a sense, independently productive, so that you might think that the role of capital is to make labor more productive. That's the conventional view. You saw 10 boards an hour with a handsaw, or 100 boards an hour with a machine saw, and the machine saw makes us more productive because we're able to do more with it. But the binary economist sees the machine saw is actually doing a lot of the extra work. In our example, it's better than that. If you haul a sack a mile and you're exhausted, but you put 10 sacks on a horse and go twice as far in half the time, you realize that the horse is doing most of the extra work. And then if you put sacks on a truck, you can do thousands of times more work. And that's the second example you get there. It shows that we start with that the human factor. If you look at our society now compared to some of the movies you saw that show us in 1900, 1800, maybe around the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, a lot of movies like that. You look at how things were produced. Things have got. We're producing much more. We're producing much bigger things. We're producing much faster. We're producing stronger. We're producing so much more. And it's not because we are more productive, but it's because we have learned to unleash the productive powers of nature in different ways. So humans are productive, and technology makes humans more productive. But technology really makes capital much, much, much more productive than people. And one of the things I say is that when you think about capital, it actually, in the real world, it does four kinds of things that contribute to a bigger economy, and only one of them has to do with what we call productivity. Capital replaces labor, just like the horse replaced the human for hauling. Capital vastly supplements labor. You very rarely use a capital instrument and just get the same amount of work that the human did. And when you do get simply a replacement, that's wonderful because you get leisure. And that's kind of a growth. That you have the same work done in leisure. That's a bigger single nail without a hammer, or saw a single board without that. We can't make a single computer chip. So capital does work that labor can never do. So people tell you, well, capital creates more jobs for labor, but the truth is capital creates far more jobs for capital. So Paul has put out this chart that says, although we get this mammoth growth over time, 1700, 1800, 1900, you can fill in the numbers, the human factor isn't really getting a lot bigger. In fact, we might say we're working less. Some people say, well, a lot more skills today, but in a way, I think a person having to maintain a covered wagon from New York to Washington in 1776 had a heck of a lot more skills than a truck driver today. So skills are different. Some of them are greater, but to the extent that capital increases labor productivity, it concentrates higher productivity in fewer people. They're always doing more and more with more productive capital and less labor. So we see, the binary economist sees that capital is doing most of the extra work. Now, other people, Marx, others saw that too, and they saw capital as the enemy, but that's only if there's no way to enable everybody to own capital. You can own the machines that are replacing and vastly supplementing labor work and doing much more and doing work without labor. Then it's liberating. It's not something that deprives you of anything. Fourth thing capital can do, of course, is it can work without labor. And ladies and gentlemen, think about living without your washing machine. Or think about carrying the water on a jug on your head for 3 miles rather than turning on a faucet. So we've got incredible ways that capital replaces and vastly supplements the work of labor. And then the next thing you have to realize is that in an economy, production is income. What you produce, that's what income is now. With the modern world and with barter and elimination of barter and money, I do work in one thing, I get money, and then I spend it on something else where someone else has done work. But the reality is that production is income. And not only does the horse do much more work than the person who was hauling, but of course has the capacity to distribute much more income. Now there are always those that say, well, it takes the person to get the idea of domesticating the horse, or invent the shovel, or invent the car, or build it, or replace it, or monitor, or repair it. But the binary economist always says, yes, that's true, but the work of inventing, designing, building, implementing, putting in place, repairing, monitoring, watching, financing, all that work, even the work of the entrepreneur that's mystified, the work of all these others is not the work of capital itself. It's the work of others. If I loaded sacks on 10 people rather than loading sacks on a donkey or a horse and did the leading, who would say that the work of leading is the work of hauling? And so it's a different kind of work. And so the process of capital doing more and more and more of the work is a process that began in the Stone Age and continues until today. The wonderful solution about binary economics is that capital can buy itself on the promise of its future income. You only invest in things that pay for themselves. And capital can distribute the income that produces its output. Now, you showed another chart here. This shows the conventional idea of growth. The conventional idea is that labor is doing most of the work. And so if you look at the national incomes, it's true. We pay laborers 70% of the income. We pay capital owners about 30%. And that's been a constant figure. It's kind of going down recently, but it's been relatively constant. But our binary economists argue that that's really a disguised redistribution. If you really paid labor what it's worth in terms of the work it's doing, we wouldn't have the same structure that we have today. I can tell you that there are a lot of people who would like to have my job teaching, and they probably would work for a fraction of my salary. There are a lot of people in New York City having with PhDs driving taxi cabs. There's not an economy in the world that doesn't protect its labor and protect its favored capital from competition. So
that's an interesting concept, Robert.
It's always that way, and so in a way, the binary economist,
Which one?
The one that's below that. And see, we see the same growth. That shows the same growth, but it shows capital doing more and more and more of the work, and labor, really, that's that top branch there, that little band on top. Labor is basically is not increasing. But the good news.
Oh, I see. You mean percentage-wise. This is a smaller percentage
yes,
than
it's
this, which is capital.
Percentage of the whole. The process of shifting work from labor to capital means that labor's market claim, if we didn't jimmy the market, the real market claim of labor on production would go down. But the wonderful thing is that capital is so productive that if it were broadly owned,
this part,
it would be much more profitably employed. And to understand this, it's important to point out something that conventional economics doesn't look at very much. The Keynesian economists, so-called followers of John Maynard Keynes, look at it a little bit. And that is, we have huge unused capacity. I always say if I could make Paula the queen of the world, and that would be one of my goals in life, she'd be a great queen. I always say that if Paula were the queen of the world and her job were to feed and clothe and shelter the world, give people the resources to liberate themselves to their highest good. Well, she may not be able to do it right away, but it'd be a heck of a lot easier than 100 years ago, and a heck of a lot easier than 200 years ago.
Because of capital.
Because of capital, we don't employ the capital that we could, and there are technologies on the drawing board that we don't even use. That's because people don't have the purchasing power. And they don't have the purchasing power because capital ownership is concentrated, and it could be broad. Many always say, well, instead of a good Queen Paula, it would be, some bad queen or king that didn't want to feed and clothe and shelter the world, but just loved unused capacity. So this evil queen or king goes into Flint, Michigan, and sees a plant and mothballs, because the jobs are all over there in Korea and other places. And she says, well, that's not enough. I want 5 plants in Flint, Michigan, each one state-of-the-art, each one bigger than the one before, all with my name on it, shaped like pyramids, barrels like pyramids. And well, heck, it'd be a heck of a lot easier to create 5 huge productive plants and mothballs today than 100 years ago. So we not only have the capacity to produce more food and clothing, shelter, we have the capacity to produce more capacity. And
right.
What's the reason for why it doesn't? Because almost all capital is concentrated, and it doesn't distribute the income necessary to purchase its output. As capital becomes more and more the productive factor, it needs to spread itself, and it can do so without taking from the rich. The capital that now buys itself for a relatively small population, 1% of the people pretty much own 50% of the wealth, and 10% own 90% in most countries. If we could broaden that ownership, the very promise of the broader ownership would more profitably employ unused capacity. And I think that's really, in a way, the key. People need to understand that the market demands the capital goods, machines, tools, structures, trademarks, processes, land, more tillable land, that the market for capital depends upon the market for consumer goods that it will produce in the future period. The demand for capital goods today and the labor to create those capital goods and run them depends upon the promise of broader ownership in the future. So if capital buys itself on the promise of its future income, which it can do on credit, it can then distribute the income necessary to purchase its output.
And that has to do with the insurance companies, right?
That has to do with setting up a system to enable not just the rich, but everybody to be able to acquire capital, the earnings of capital. Having run through all this that I talked about, then the binary economist gets very lawyer-like and says, all this means that there's a right that people don't understand that they need, which is almost never talked about, but which is crucial to the American system of capitalism. And that is the right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital. Now, is it Richard? Is that the name of the gentleman?
Yes, Richard.
Yes, Richard.
Richard. My guess is that unless you you've read my stuff, you've never heard of the right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital in so many words. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. But most people haven't, and I don't mean to embarrass you.
No,
most people have never heard of that right.
I've studied economics because I'm an anarchist and a revolutionary.
Okay.
So I had to study all types of beliefs about the planet.
But in any of those beliefs,
but
did you hear about that one?
Did you ever
I never heard the specific term.
The right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital.
The right to acquire
It's
capital.
a twist on words. No, I haven't heard it before.
No, it's not a twist on words because Marx talks about the evils of private property, but this is saying property needs to be distributed more widely. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I mean that is true, but I'm just trying to focus on just a little issue, and that is to say, I mean if you were to negotiate a contract or get someone to paint your house or whatever you were going to do, wanted to buy a car, there's usually a contract, and then there are rights in there. And these are specific words, and for good or for ill, the words have power. And what I'm saying is that here is this right, the right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital, which I think is a very important right. It is a right it's a right that defined the 20th century. The battle of the so-called Western economies was to preserve the right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital for very few people, really. I mean, only a few people have the right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital in any real strong way.
But I think that's sort of an unwritten law. Nobody thinks about it. Just a few people sort of came in and took what they wanted and then indicated that they were the ones that were supposed to have it.
Well, that's right. And the assumption is that if you're going to get it, you have to work hard, save, and invest wisely. But that's not the way capital is acquired. Most of the time, capital is acquired with the earnings of capital, not with the earnings of labor. To expect someone to compete with a capital owner in the acquisition of capital by his or her labor is to expect the person to compete with a horse for hauling. Can't do it.
But it seems as though what binary economics is pointing to is the original acquisition of capital. How did the original capital get acquired?
Well, that's a very deep question, and actually, binary economics is, I would say, not explicitly addressing the history of the situation.
Okay.
I think you put binary economics aside, it would seem to me that today's privately owned capital, much of it was confiscated, the result of warriors. We certainly took it from the Indians in this country. I mean, there's the legitimacy of capital holdings today depend upon the system set up by sovereign nations. And if you know much about sovereign nations, they can go to war and they can do all sorts of terrible things. It's not a violation of international law to go to war and to decimate people. It's sad, but it's true. But I'm trying, and the binary economists are trying to deal with the world as it is. And once you have a sovereign, like the U.S., that has a system of private property, and an approach to the distribution of goods and services, and a system that creates rights, then one can try to overthrow it, or one can try to say that we don't need it, or there are all sorts of things you can do if you think you're going to help poor and working people. But one thing I think you can do if you're going to help poor and working people is to say, well, if we've got these rules, let's see if we can create a situation where these rules work for the poor as well as they work for the rich.
And then there won't be poor.
And then they will be less poor, at least. And that's the beginning point. So it's in that sense that I focus. I mean, there are various rights. First of all, it's good to have a property right in your own labor. If you don't have a property right in your own labor, you're like the horse. The horse may do the work, but it's the owner of the horse. And, we talk about human capital. Black people in this country were enslaved. They were real human capital, and with the terrible moral consequences and social consequences. But so it's good to have a property right in your own labor, but it's better still not only to have a property right in your own labor, but it's better still consumer demand for its products, and distributing that income to its owners, buying capital with the earnings of capital. The socialist system that earmarked the Soviet Union was a system that legally outlawed the right to acquire capital with the earnings of capital.
But Russia is more like
and there is a power in words. Those words do mean something, and then when you begin looking at the institutions, why is it that the rich are able to acquire capital with the earnings of capital, but the poor are not able to acquire capital with the earnings of capital? What is it? I mean, it's one thing to say, well, the laws are stacked against the poor, but it's another thing to say, well, okay, let's see what we can do about unstacking them. And that really is the next step. And if you want to put on that, either the six-box diagram, we can move to that as being an element of the discussion. But if I will say this, that one of the way the rich acquire capital with the earnings of capital is they use six institutions. This is what the rich do to get richer. They use corporations, and you can see they love corporations, and that's the box on the top left. And you see the little hatch marks there. The box is growing. Corporations are always, these big creditworthy companies are always growing. And if you want to look at where the action is, America's 3,000 largest companies, for good or for ill, own about 90% of the investable assets in America. So you can talk about, little, small level capitalism, and, this grocery store and this, a convenience store and then this dry cleaner. But the actions with the 3,000. So they use corporations. That gives them what's called non-recourse activities. That is to say, if the corporation loses money, it doesn't amount to their personal loss. They use lenders. That's the third box. They use trusts a lot. My guess is that Paris Hilton doesn't do a lot of her own managing. She's got trustees and fiduciaries taking care of it for her. If you go to the right of the box 3, you'll see that there's an insurance principle there. The rich love insurance. They pay for insurance to insure their losses in various ways, and they have tons of insurance. They use forms of government reinsurance. Now we're talking about bailing out Bear Stearns.
Yeah.
I mean, investors are supposed to take the risk of loss, but not too much. We have to bail them out, and you got the central bank in the picture. The rich use these six institutions: corporations, trusts, commercial lenders, insurers like the box 4, government reinsurance, and the central bank. They use all those things to acquire capital with the earnings of capital. And the same institutions that make the rich and able to buy capital with the earnings of capital can also help the poor buy capital with the earnings of capital, with the extra punch that poor people bring to the table, something the rich don't. Poor people bring to the table, poor and middle-class people bring to the table a pent-up appetite for food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, for all the very things that the corporations make. So they actually are better potential stockholders than the rich who can't spend enough.
Right.
And so that's the other element. So when lenders loan, they need two sources of repayment. Good lending policy requires both the belief that the capital invested, and that's you see in the corporation, will pay for itself, pay for its cost, to repay a loan at a competitive rate. And the second thing lenders need is collateral, is some form of security if the loan doesn't pay off. Well, you've heard the adage, it takes money to make money. Well, that's true, but the reality is it takes capital to acquire more capital on credit. And that's what the rich like to do the most, to take other people's money and make more money with it, and then pay back the money and have something left over. But if you have insurance, then you don't need collateral. If you can insure the risk of business failure, which I think we can do, then the poor can acquire capital, and instead of having collateral to put up, there could be an insurance policy to cover the loss, and the poor people are never in hock for the loss. They never have a reduction in their take-home pay. They end up simply being increasingly able to participate, and the capital is just buying itself for the rich, but in such a way that we have growing unused capacity, and we don't use the capital to produce the very goods that people need. So that's kind of an overview.
Right.
And I guess it probably raises lots of questions. And I guess maybe this would be interesting for me to stop talking now and just listening. I'm open to any questions. I must say I've never had the privilege of debating with an anarchist on the air, and I can't remember when the last time I did. I have run into a few in my life, and so I'll try to be open and try to be open-minded. I will say that I start with the notion that a certain amount of order is necessary, and unlike the libertarians on the right, and I have debated them more than I have anarchists. You know, the libertarians on the right think we don't need any government. Maybe you're one of those, I don't know. But at any rate, I do start with the notion that we need certain system of order, and that property doesn't exist without protection, and that we do need it. But anyway, I'm open.
I just want to make a comment before Richard starts about. I was at St. Mark's Church, and he read from a book of some anarchists that were going to be executed, and it was very moving and very inspiring. And I began to realize that what the media has said anarchy is very different than what these people were practicing. And I also have a feeling that even though we think, as you've explained it with reinsurance and so on, that we're talking about orderliness, no system can withstand corruption and cheating. And I think that, in the case of the anarchists that were sent to prison, and then what was depicted about them, it was more corruption than what they were actually doing. There was some hiding of things, and I think even in your model, I think you would agree that some people, for whatever reasons, don't want it known about the power of capital and how capital is acquired and how important capital is. And they could even go to such lengths of disinformation as creating ideologies that says the very thing that could help them is bad.
Well, I think that I agree. I think the reason binary economics is not understood is the result of it's a combination of ignorance and a design to keep people confused. I think both of those things are true. And let me say that those 6 boxes and every one of those institutions is subject to corruption.
Right.
Every one of those corporations could be involved in fraud or deception or polluting the environment or doing all sorts. Every one of those trustees could have his hands in the pockets of the people he's trying to serve. Every lender, every one of those people could have elements of corruption.
Right.
But the binary system, and one of its virtues, I think, is it takes people where we find them.
Right.
And it simply says that however corrupt the system is, however terrible it works, it will work better to the extent people can acquire capital with the earnings of capital.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. If the anarchists have suffered from being misunderstood, I think the binary economists on the right would be misunderstood as, or on the left would say, oh, you're into private property, and then the right, what does the right usually grumble about?
Well, the right conceives binary economics as a clever way of achieving a socialist redistribution with capitalist rhetoric.
Exactly. Okay.
Which is only true if the broader distribution of ownership will not promote growth.
Yes, and then you explain, because people need to buy these products and they're hungry for these products, that's what's going to ensure the growth.
That's right.
Yeah, so you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but actually whatever has been given up, what remains of it is going to be so much more valuable that everybody's going to benefit.
I agree, by the way, that if capital does not have a distributive relationship to growth, meaning to say if broader capital acquisition will not promote growth, it is simply a way of redistributing wealth, in a socialist way with capital. I agree with the critique. I just say they're wrong on the assumption. And by the same token, I say that if binary economics does not promote a growth, then it is redistribution. And whether you want to do it through trusts or whether you want the government to hand out wages or welfare, I mean, I agree.
term of revolutionary, or on that tone, it seems we're going to be redefining capital and redefining anarchy, at least in the public's eye.
Well, I need to know what Richard says about anarchy.
Okay,
I
you're
need
on,
to be
Richard.
educated
Okay.
now, or at least to interact with him.
Right.
And
Right.
kind enough to be here.
Well, first I'd like to state that human beings are social creatures, and anarchism, just a social belief that started with the idea that we really don't need religion, or the way it was practiced, is the way anarchists saw religious people using religion was more a way to hide rich people's inhumane behavior and justify it. So like even Sacco and Zetti, I forget which one, used to be a Christian, a church-going, regular Christian, and they gave it up because they said, these preachers preach one thing but do another thing. And they saw how these rich people go to these churches, and I don't know if you ever heard the term poverty pimp. They started saying, well, these poor people, let's just throw them something. And if you really study human beings, we have this need, I don't know why, for social fascism, we call it. Even the best models of human beings is always a leader and a follower. And what anarchists basically are saying, we acknowledge that human flaw in human beings. And I started in the left as far as, I used to think automatically left-wing people were more humane, and right-wing people were just about business. And anything justifies business. But I realized a lot of people are just caught, and they just have to make money because there is nothing else. Everything has been crushed, destroyed, and the land has been turned into concrete, so it's not really, and there's police. So even if everybody got rid of the concrete and there was just farms everywhere, you would still have people that would want to be on top. And that was what I had to learn a long time. Even when I was open-minded in groups I started, you'd always have somebody that would try and get to the top. And because I was very into psychology and I was abused when I was younger, I had to learn the human mind and how it works. But I never had money to go to college, so I kind of had to do it by myself. So anarchist, basically, to me, is the highest form of human responsibility. It's not chaos, it's not antisocial behavior. It is saying, and I'm basically a green anarchist. There's all different types of anarchists. I'm very into environmental. I think a lot of products human produce we don't need. The only thing we need is a healthy social life. We need clean air, clean water, and a healthy way of dealing with emotional problems. And the way the capitalists did it was basically human beings would use religion. And sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't. But there's a distinction between, I view as organized religion, which promotes capitalism, whether you're left-wing or right-wing.
Well, you have to define capitalism now, in terms of
I mean...
This is the part where I wanted to be careful on,
right.
Robert.
No, I'm just trying to explain anarchism. Not how it's described in the media. And always say, I mean, human being first, and we all have emotions, and we all come at things in different ways because you all grow up in different situations. And I think what anarchists are saying is one economic theory, left-wing or right-wing, in their opinion, or my opinion, because of what they've seen and been through with all different types of social situations and been disappointed where Russia and Europe and a lot of these things were not real, truly socialism. True socialism, to me, the anarchist, is freeing human beings from oppressive working conditions, child labor, and I know you wouldn't agree with some of this. No money, no landlords, no bosses, and not using religion in a way where it's, you know, they don't pay any taxes and all this. They'll wait till after you die to worry about what happens. The anarchists are saying that, and this is where I'm more of a green anarchist, I don't prize inventions of the human brain. The human brain, to me, it can be either good or bad. It can be misused or not used at all. And that's why I think the diagram of rich and poor, left and right, I used to think that was a real term that meant something, but it really doesn't, because I met homeless people, and I've seen personalities in them where they would just be as greedy, just as selfish, just as corrupt. If you gave them $1 million, they'd be just as bad as any rich person. And I've seen rich people, I don't know if you know the case of the, you know the Robbins Empire, the ice cream people? A guy wrote a book about vegetarianism because his father had a heart attack. He owned the Baskin Robbins chain. He was like a millionaire. He had a swimming pool in shape of an ice cream in back of his house. And the son said his father used to eat ice cream morning, noon, and night. And he had like a massive stroke and heart attack because all he ate was ice cream. Because he grew up with ice cream and he had a horrible diet and never exercised and he had a massive heart attack. So he was left a fortune. He had this dilemma, which is, you know, this is why I disagree a little bit with that old money and the Rockefellers. What do I do with this money? Should I take it? Should I give it back to him? And he said, you know what, I don't want that money because the profits are made on the backs of exploitation, slavery, and the product we are producing, it harms the planet. If you're vegan, which I am, sometimes I cheat on dairy because I'm poor. When I was working, I was vegan. Vegan means I don't eat dairy or eggs, I don't wear leather, and I don't use animal tested products. And what happened is, he wrote a book and he gave the money back to the family and said, I don't want the money. Now he could have used that to redistribute the wealth and, you know, if he wanted to do that. But he said, this money comes from exploitation. And my ethics and my morals, which I think are very important to economics too, very important. I think you can't have one without the other. Because that sometimes is more important than the economic theory. Because the human heart is very important, and the spirit, to see really sometimes where people are at with the planet and everything else. So he decided, no, I'm going to work on my own and make a vegan products with no dairy in it, because I don't want people to be sick, I want people to be healthy. So I'm not against everything you said, but I just was like, I don't think, like the reparations movement, they were saying a lot of the money that was made was based off of slavery, and they could prove it. The reparations people proved that these corporations, a lot of the money was slave money, and none of those families got any of that money from the profits. And then they went to court, and the corporations fought it, and the reparations people lost because they were so adamant that they're not going to give the money back. They don't care how they made it; they're keeping the money. And therefore these people are rich. And then these poor people that died in Potter's Field, and because back then there was separate burials for white people and black people. And indigenous people probably didn't even count. So when anarchism is, which was different from the socialist, no matter who you give power to, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. And I had to do a lot of reading. I had a lot of psychological problems. That are really generally capable of power over other people, or you can give them trust or power, whether it's a huge plant and they decide who gets the money or how, or would not pollute the planet, or say it's more important to make the money than, you know, whether you're polluting the planet or not, because we have to have money. So the anarchists are basically saying, well, what if you got rid of money and landlords? But you can still do kind of, I think, what you're saying, where there wouldn't be any poor people. And there wouldn't be any rich people. It would just be different values where there would be such a high level of human trust that you would not need to make products that pollute the planet just to redistribute the uneven wealth. And also, you're always going to have social problems. You're going to have you have all this concrete now, and a lot of these cities are based on money. A lot of them are unhealthy cities. There's a lot of pollution. There's hardly any recycling going on. And there's a lot of abuse by landlords. And the situation right now is, what I'm trying to do, because even BAI wouldn't even let you talk about these things. And I don't even know if BAI will let you even talk about binary economics. I don't know. They just have this, there's left and right. And I even with Marx, I was like, yeah, what about the indigenous people? And the Luddites who said these machines will eventually make you the new enslaver. Whereas at least if you have farms and rural agricultural communities, it's not perfect, but everybody can at least grow their own food, and they can decide when they want to work, what they want to wear, and they decide their own lives. And this is where, like, I used to think socialists were maybe a little more humane, but I meant socialists that, you know, you go out to dinner and you have the money and they'll eat right in front of you and not even offer you anything. I'm like, how is that socialism? That's just like elitism.
Elitism.
Yeah.
Where socialism is fashionable.
Right. But I meant people who are open to my anarchist ideas and my indigenous values and things like that, who might not agree with like all of it, but they agree with a lot of it. But if they see I'm like, because I'm on disability and I can't afford to like maybe eat out, a lot of times leftist socials eat out at restaurants afterwards, and sometimes I don't have the money to buy anything, and they'll buy me something because they don't want to see me sit there while everybody else eats. And these are not anarchists, so I was like, there must be something that is higher than economics that sometimes has to be addressed and cannot be addressed through just production, because people will abuse it. They'll say, well, I'd rather take shortcuts to make something larger. And I really think small is better than larger. Little small things where everybody owns it. And then I don't know if you've ever seen Sicko. Socialism has its problems, but when people go to like the hospitals in Europe, they don't ask you for insurance forms. They have doctors that are just as good here, and they fix any problems you have. And they brought these people that I think were on 8 medications or 10, and they got them down to 2. And they changed their diet. Because Medicaid and Medicare wouldn't pay for it. And this guy had terrible teeth, and I think they took him to Cuba, and they fixed his entire teeth and got him to lost weight, gave him a better diet. So I think the problem is, even the greatest socialist ideas, it's still human beings running them. And we're flawed. We're not these perfect human beings.
Well, don't you think binary could, by distributing capital, you have less of a tendency for flawed people at the top? If you have more spread out, maybe could help?
I think anything's better for a start than what we're doing now.
Well,
anything.
And
I don't think these two... Sure.
In a couple of ways.
Sure.
Because that was very thoughtful set of ideas that you
Thank
offered. And just a couple of ways. First of all, I like your emphasis on the issue of medicine and the idea of sickness. If we have a sickness, and I do think there's a lot to be said to the idea that our society has a lot of sickness and dysfunctionality and a lot of cruelty and a lot of oppression, a lot of bad things. Sometimes there's more than one medicine. One medicine may work on one part of the system, and another medicine may work on another part of the system. So I want to start off by saying that it is possible that your message of anarchism, as you've described it, which seems to me very benign and well-meaning, that may be a medicine, and it may be a medicine that makes people behave better. And so that's a good medicine.
I think so, yeah.
But maybe there are some other medicines too. So that would be the first thing, and I do hope, I don't think you see it yet, but I do hope you come to see that binary economics may be another medicine. So that's number one. The second thing I want to do is I want to give you a limerick that I used at I teach a course in binary economics at my law school, and and I have this limerick that's designed to try to get people's attention. I say, if you think that neither the left nor the right has a clue as to what there's to do, then binary economics may be for you. A lot of your opinions are formed, and I think very accurately so, on the idea that there's problems with both the left way of doing things, left-wing way of doing things, and the right-wing way of doing things. And you know, when people say, well, I have an alternative to the left and the right, they usually they see this line. There's the left side of the line and there's the right side of the line. And when you say, I got an alternative, they look for some mix in the center.
Right.
And
that's why BAI would never let me on.
Yeah. But binary economics is not a mix of left and right, and it's not in the center. It is really, it's a whole different idea. So, and many of your opinions are formed on the basis of a debate that's between the left and the right, and I'm going to try to characterize what the debate is, this by way of a metaphor. People need to eat, and so let's think about food as being apples. And apple trees grow apples, and people are hired to pick the apples. Now, the right wing is saying capitalism produces far more than socialism. If you go to the refrigerators in America compared to the refrigerators in Russia when they still had communism, you'd notice our refrigerators are fuller and their refrigerators are empty. And you notice that when they take people out to dinner, including anarchists, and someone wants to chip in because you can't afford the food, there seems to be more people to chip in with more money than a capitalist. So their argument is that capitalism creates the big pie, even though it may be unjust and unequal. It's the big pie. And the big pie is created by helping the capitalist owners own the trees, pay as much as they can afford to pay for the workers, and if we still have people who cannot, who still cannot have apples because they're not able to pick apples, they're disabled in some way, or we don't need more apple pickers because we've got machines now that are helping the present apple pickers pick them for less, just the way the Luddites described. So the best way to do is help the rich get richer, give them tax breaks, let them pro-industry, pro-government, let them hire as many workers as they can, and if we still have poor, we'll give them apples. That's the right-wing approach. Now we got the far-left approach, which is Marx, who says, heck no, we can't have private property. The rich are going to exploit the poor. We got to have the state own the apple trees, and everybody has to work. And if you can't work, we'll give you a disability. But everybody needs to work hard, and everything is decided by labor. And if you work, you eat. And if you don't work, then you can't work. Then we'll give you what you need. But there's not a lot of autonomy in that system, but that's the second alternative. And then there's the middle group, which is the kind of the Keynesian Democrats. They say, well, we like private property, so we're going to fine them and have the apple trees grow owned by the rich, and it's fine to have them make profits, but we got to tax some of the profits and give them to the poor, and we've got to let people unionize so that they can build up the price of their labor and get more for their apple picking. We have to have a few regulated apple trees that are going to cover the utilities and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to strengthen government and have government be the surrogate for all the poor people who can't fend for themselves. And that's sort of the mixed center of approach. Now the binary economic approach says, why can't the poor acquire apple trees so that they can grow their own apples and hire themselves? Why can't everybody be cut in the apple price, particularly when if you increase the demand for apples because people are going to be owning more, then they're going to be able to, then we'll have more profitable apple trees. Why not cut the poor? So I think the first thing for you to recognize, if you want to take a step forward, is first of all, that the binary economists aren't saying that your message isn't a good message and a sensitizing message in lots of you to do is to ask you to think about how many problems you perceive in the present system might be improved if we had broader ownership. So how many of the symptoms and the sicknesses and the problems in character and the problems in honesty that you see right now, how many of these problems might be improved if we had broader ownership? And this idea of capital buying itself with the earnings of capital. Well, I'm going to start with a few of them. The first thing is, again, if you look at it from the point of view of just a simple thing of hauling, if you got to haul a sack yourself, you're going to be exhausted all your life. But if you can get a horse, your quality of your life improves. So you can treat the horse humanely, and you don't want to overwork him. It may even be a very happy horse if you do it right, as long as you don't put too much stress. But capital has the impact of letting you earn without working. And I think everybody needs it. Everybody needs to be able to earn without working, and you can earn through owning. And so now, once you're earning, then by the way, if every disabled person had a viable capital estate, you wouldn't be waiting for your welfare checks. And you would be able to do that. You would be able to afford medical care. Workers who had a little bit of capital would be able to say, I'm not going to take this job. This is an oppressive job. I can earn enough with my capital if I cut down my expenses. I'll take a lower paying job with someone who treats me more humanely. I'm going to be able to do that. We have a lot of environmental problems, but a lot of the environmental problems exist because people cannot afford a greener way of doing something. There are a lot of things that we could do greener, have greener growth, not environmentally unfriendly growth. If people could only afford the better products, but they can't afford them, and they can't afford them because they're not in the process of owning. So there's a factor too. The interesting thing about, we think of the environment as being something we have to bridle big bad industry with good government action. The rivers in Russia and the land is much more polluted, and there was no private industry for the last 75 years until recently. I'm not advocating the present system. They have a plutocratic system that's worse than ours, it seems to me. Much more concentration of wealth. But the truth is that that government in and of itself isn't necessarily, and I think as an anarchist you might agree, may not be the solution to that. So even the environment is a problem of a lot of unused capacity that we don't use. Medical care, why can't people afford their medical care? Migration, why do people have to come to this country to earn a living? Why can't they earn a living in their own country? Because they're excluded from capital ownership. So all of that. Now, another thing I'll say is that there's kind of a funny joke about binary economics. I don't know if you remember Bob Newhart, but he once did a story about Abner Doubleday trying to explain, the guy, the baseball guy, trying to explain to Parker Brothers baseball. And you got 3 strikes and 4 balls and 9 innings and fouls and fairs and all these home runs, outrun homes, all these different things. And Parker Brothers says, is this a joke? I mean, how people aren't going to be able to figure this out. I think the principles of business and capitalism, when they're democratic, that is to say, when you have diffuse, I think they're not. Binary economics isn't more complicated than baseball. The idea that people need to be able to own the machines that are replacing their labor, and that will liberate them. That's pretty strict. And so I think with ownership in the long run, I sometimes jokingly say accounting is going to replace baseball as the national sport. People are going to be very interested in what the corporations do when they become broadly owned. They're going to watch much more closely. They're going to look at the returns because that's where their income is going to come from. So it could bring out something better in people than something worse. It's possible that greed is partly a function of insecurity, and if everybody had real security, we wouldn't have so much greed. We wouldn't have to be selling all this advertising. Why do we have to advertise to tell people they need something? It's because we have a very poor market for really goods and services. Companies now that are convincing people that they need flat-screen television sets rather than tube television sets. Heck, companies could invest in food, clothing, and shelter that people right now can't afford because they don't own. economics is a solution to all problems. But once you recognize that there is a capitalism, and I know that some people that's a dirty word, that will diffuse ownership rather than concentrate it, that can diffuse power, economic power, rather than concentrate it, that can enable all people to earn without owning, because the very machines that are doing the work are part of their estate. Some of these symptoms of the problem can change. Now, we still may need someone like you and others like you to preach a higher level of consciousness. But the virtue of the binary economics medicine is that it takes people where it finds them. It doesn't require them to be any better. It knows, it says, okay, people are profit motivated. But if you're profit motivated, broadening ownership is the best thing for a corporation. If you're profit motivated and you're worried about selling your products, binary economics is the best thing. If you want to sell your products and you don't want to have so much advertising to convince people, you don't need to convince a person without shoes that he needs to buy shoes. You don't need to convince a hungry person that he ought to buy some food. All this advertising is to convince people who don't need more that they ought to buy something, and that's because we have a lousy market for consumer goods, and we have a lousy market for consumer goods because we have concentrated ownership. So you see how these things begin maybe to play in a different way, and that you might it might be to your advantage, Richard, to see that a recognition of a binary economy will make it easier to make your ideas seem more practical and more realizable. And then the last thing I'm going to say, and I think it's something that people sort of have to focus on, the idea to take something out of the market, take something away that has been produced, imposes upon somebody else an obligation to produce it. Things don't come out of nothing. And for good or for ill, it's nice to think of the old family farm, but we couldn't support the humans we have today on Earth if we simply relied on old family farm mechanisms. There's an advantage to machines. There's an advantage to horses. There's an advantage to trucks. There's an advantage to this mechanization. And it's an advantage that it has the potential to produce leisure, which produces a philosophical class and a moral class. It also may produce degeneracy and decadence. I mean, that's the other side of it. We don't know. But at least it has that potential. So I'm going to stop talking.
Wow. That's very inspiring. It's very inspiring to me that, with more leisure, people can have time to do art and poetry and philosophical and moral speculation, because that's what you were doing, Richard. Moral speculation.
Yeah, what I'd agree is that we need more people doing it and less speculation. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was at the demonstration this weekend against the war, and I was so disappointed at just kind of like people seem to think you just say peace and it magically happens, and a lot of them I was just arguing with, like, there's passivism and there's pacifism. And I work with all types of people because I love Malcolm X and I love Martin Luther King, and I love them both, and Gandhi. And I love all approaches, and I call it human liberation, because that's the only thing that's going to set people free. But I still think you cannot let people off, and I have the quotes here, that Roosevelt and these other people, what they did to these anarchists and socialists, whether it was, see, to me, socialism is not European-based. To me, communism is not European-based. It's not, that was really just basically a religion started by somebody. To me, basically, religion is you don't question authority. You just say, that's the leader, they must be right. And it's not good for humanity to not question things. Every human being needs to question even themselves and keep looking at themselves and realize we always can grow. I don't know if you heard of this journalist, Mumia Abu Jamal. He's an award-winning journalist on death row in Philadelphia. And I said, I don't know how he survives in that animal cage and writes all this incredible stuff, and he's an award-winning journalist. And they said basically that he's freer than most people that are out here walking around, because he has such a attained such a high level of consciousness that, you know, he has a lot of books out, but he's in this horrible cell. And I think until we get people like...
It is a method that what's good for the Rockefellers should be good for the rest.
No, you understand that. All I'm saying
Not
is...
that it's bad.
Right.
Wealth is not bad.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying, what do you do with people that had no... or that wealth that had no ethics or humanity to it when the money was made? I'm not saying now, because everything's been concreted over and the buffalo's been killed, and I don't know if you could undo the cities and even replant them into farms, but you can make them green, and you could get rid of these do-nothing two-party system. And all I'm asking is, let's say someone rapes somebody and you let them go, and they say, I didn't really mean it, and then they rape again. Do you just say, okay, after the 20th time you finally reformed? You still should show some remorse, some humanity to say what I did was wrong. And that's all I'm saying, if you get what I'm trying to ask. We can't say in our minds, with or for against binary economics, all I'm saying as an anarchist, social justice to me is not left to right. It's more economics of what do you do with human beings that feel no empathy, no compassion, and say anything for a buck. And I'm not saying this is what your economic is. That's what I'm saying. It's just a social dilemma.
He's not saying anything.
What do you do with those people? Do you let them keep the money, or I think what I'm saying is I agree with what you're saying about, you know, let everybody in on the picture, but there's always this social dilemma. What do you do with these social situations? Because there's always going to be these social situations.
Can't you conceive of that as an important first step? Right now, the rich acquire capital with the earnings of capital using corporations, trusts, lenders, insurance companies, government insurance, and the monetary system. And we have a capitalist base that could produce far more of what people need, but doesn't. So isn't that a remarkable first step? You've never heard it before. Isn't that a remarkable
yeah,
first
it's
step
different.
to be able to do that? Now, if it doesn't correct all the other problems, fine. But wow, you know, here you've been, I don't know how old you are. You seem like a very fine fellow. You've been alive for decades, and you're hearing this for the first time from Paula Gloria. Me?
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard about it.
Isn't it amazing that you're hearing this for the first time?
Yeah, it is.
And doesn't it make you wonder that the very fact that you're hearing it for the first time, this idea of liberating people and enabling them to own, that maybe the reason you're hearing it for the first time is that it's potent beyond your imagination?
Well, I have a large imagination, so I can...
I know you do, but I'm not sure I've plugged into it yet. I don't know that you've seen the face between the faces. I mean, let me
No,
tell
I
you
did,
that,
believe me.
And I may be under illusion, but I know when somebody sees binary economics. You know why? Because their behavior changes. They don't go on doing what they've been doing. Paula knows somebody named Sid Greenfield, I think. You know Sid?
Yeah.
The light went on for him sometime about a couple of years ago. He's a different man. Paula, you are a different woman since the time that this happened to you. You are changed. I know when someone's changed. And Richard, I can see you've got a good heart and a good head, but I can tell that you haven't changed. That you have not seen, aha, my gosh, a huge, important secret that the left wing and the right wing, that's really, and whose misbehavior has formed an awful lot of my judgment, has been keeping from me. I'm going to make inroads with you, and I must say I'm jealous to do it because I appreciate your spirit. I am hoping this time or next time or the time after that, you suddenly have an aha experience. Because you can say, all of the things I've ever said about making people better, raising the consciousness, all these different things, fine, but here's a whole new medicine. And it really isn't capitalism the way I've come to distrust it. And it really isn't socialism. And it really isn't a mix of the two. And it really does explain why we have all this capacity to do better but don't. So I'm looking in a way, I'm looking for a convert in Richard. And I know I don't have it yet, and I mean to be respectful. That you can't force him to see what he doesn't see.
Oh, can you hold just a second?
Between those two faces.
Hang on just a second. I might have a call. Hang on. Hello? This is Rabbit Hole. This is Rabbit Hole Central. We're streaming.
You're streaming? Oh.
Who's this?
This is Duffy. I'm just calling to confirm St. Mark's for tonight.
Yes, tonight 6:30.
6:30, okay.
Okay,
I'll
bye.
take you between 6:30 and 7.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay, we're back again.
Okay, so I'm just saying that's what I'm in this business for. I want to say, Richard, and I don't mean to put down anything you said, but you really haven't said anything I haven't heard 10,000, many times. I mean, I don't mean this. There are probably tens of thousands of people who believe what you believe and understand what you live, and maybe more, maybe even millions. But there's probably not a few thousand people that understand this concept.
I think there's a lot of people that think they believe in what I do.
No, I'm saying they've heard it before.
Right, but it's hearing, but then doing something about it. It's a real human dilemma.
But what I'm distinguishing between your idea and this idea is that this is an idea that is fundamentally. I mean, you mentioned, for example, the Luddites. I don't think the Luddites had a significantly different appreciation of the world than you do.
No, I thought they were. They make sure you can't find out about them because I've been looking for books about them, and they're really hard to find. They make sure you can't find it.
Well, I'm sure they try to repress it.
Oh, I'm sure they do because I know.
But
I can't find a book about it. I just heard it from other people.
But it seems to be our role here to not demonize the word capitalism or anarchism, but to try to elevate understanding so that what people are afraid of, they're no longer afraid of. I think wealthy people, because of what Robert was saying, lack of security, even the wealthy, feel that in order for they see so many suffering, and they go, my God, as much money as I don't have enough to give it to everybody. And the
only way to help the poor is to take it from me, they think.
They think. Right.
They think. That's exactly right.
So,
but anyway, I think these are brother and sister medicines. And if I do no more than succeed in convincing you that whatever your objections are to right, left, and center, this is different from that.
No, I agree. It's different from left or right.
And it may be your friend.
Yeah.
Because I think that it will create the leisure and the liberation necessary for people to feel freer to grapple with the great ideas that you're raising. Right now, people, I don't think, feel free to do that because they're so dependent on. You know how people expect to survive today? Most people.
The average person.
Most people expect to eat and to have shelter over their head and to be able to take care of children if they have them, et cetera, et cetera. You know what they expect? How they expect to survive? Jobs and welfare.
Well, yeah, most of them, yeah.
That's it. And so, worrying about jobs and welfare, it's kind of a luxury to worry about what Rich is talking about. I mean, it may be the long term that your message is the only thing that will really solve our deep spiritual sickness.
I didn't really have luxury when
Jobs
I was
and
thinking
welfare
about it,
is the only thing they see. And if they can begin to see and begin to materialize, that ownership will liberate them. It may be your ally.
No, all I'm saying is when I was on disability all my life. When I was working, because I had a Vietnam vet in my family, and I saw what that war is about, And when I was younger, I saw how dysfunctional my family was because, in my opinion, right-wing Christianity. I was like, my family worked very hard to get out of the city on the GI Bill. And then my brother was in Vietnam, and my family goes back, I think my grandparents were in World War I, I think. And the more I talked to my brother, the more I learned, I realized it's the priorities that people are brought up with that are all screwed up. Health is not the first one, because most working people are so overweight, they eat horrible food, that they really feel those other things aren't important. They really think, just go to church once a week, whatever it is, that's their job to kind of do the other stuff. And that's where I think it's a problem. They feel so emasculated, and I don't mean that in a male-female way, just they feel hopeless that subconsciously that they can't get away from these things. And unfortunately, their parents feel they can't get them away from these things. And that's why a lot of times I said, you know, I just rather think for myself, because all of these things seem to need, you know, non-thinking. And I think the highest form, the most important thing for anything is to meditate 10 minutes a day and really think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, do you need to do it, who's telling you to do it, why do you want to do it. And religions don't really say that. They kind of say, don't question this, don't question that, or do this and do that. And that's not very healthy for anybody. It's like saying, eat this apple. You don't know if it's rotten or not, or if it's organic, and that someone says, just trust me. And don't look at it and just eat it and close your eyes. Well, that's half the problem. You should eat it. You should look at everything you do, look at everything you eat. And most people don't do that. I got into that rut. It was so painful to ask my brother about the war and about his situation when he got AIDS that I didn't want to think about it, but I really wish I had asked him a lot more questions than now. And I think a lot of people do want to ask questions, but at some point they don't want to get over the threshold to do it. That's what I think is going on.
You know, with what Richard brings up, Robert, sometimes I think that people like you that are living in academia, although I do know academics do address some of the hidden economies. Like I picked up a book in Moe's bookstore about the drug triangle in Vietnam, and that Vietnam was really about a drug trade war.
Yes, it was.
That if, you know, when we come to the level of implementation of binary, like you could have it all laid out and how beautiful it would make everything. You know, you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. But what is that final thing that gets people, that will motivate them? Because my observation is either things are going along okay and people don't want to do what Richard's talking about, think
That's
about the apple that you're given,
right.
Or they're
That's
so stressed out and terrified because all of a sudden they're thinking the stock market's down and they're paralyzed. They can't even think. So you don't want too stressful a situation, because then maybe it's like you say, the crisis doesn't happen when they're going to storm the Bastille. They just throw a few apples or crumbs out.
Right.
And that's not going to cause the change. So
right.
What is it that will implement it? Because you use the expression yourself. You have to open the avenues for it, for the insurance companies to come in and then insure, you know, the ownership based on future earnings of capital. What do you think?
Well, my belief is that what I'm teaching is a natural law, like the law of gravity. Every natural law can be abused, and every natural law can be used to our advantage. So it is on one level simply a natural law. And then when people come to understand that natural law, they will behave with respect to it. Once people understand that capital does its own work, labor does work, and that the more broadly it is acquired, the more it will profitably employ more capital and labor. Once people understand that principle widely, then I think the policies that now help to for the rich to get richer reward the statists, the people who believe in government, to have redistribution, and the people in the mix between the two. I think once this is understood, those debates will less significantly shape human understanding. Once capital is understood as a liberator, I think it will shape a better human understanding. I can't prove that, but I believe it's true. It certainly doesn't seem to help to be premising our left-wing, right-wing, and center ideas on a fallacy, which is that broad ownership won't produce growth. It's interesting that
Excuse me, just a second. Left-wing, right-wing fallacy that broad ownership will
not produce growth.
Will not produce growth.
They believe the left and the right and the center all believe they disagree about many things, but they all agree on one thing, and that is that the broader distribution of capital acquisition will not soak up unused capacity, will not profitably employ unused capacity, and will not promote growth. And I think that's dead wrong.
Why do they believe that?
Well, that goes to that starts with the notion that the role of capital is to make labor more productive, and that the mechanism of distributing income is by making labor more productive. If you read Adam Smith, who's the father of the invisible hand and the kind of laissez-faire approach, and if you read Karl Marx, who's the author of State Socialism, and if you read John Maynard Keynes, who is the kind of the guy in the middle who says tax the rich and redistribute it to the poor, get the government involved in spending, all of their analyses, if you look at their premises, the idea that broader ownership will promote growth is not in there. The only reason a right-winger or a left-winger or a centrist would think that broad ownership will promote growth is if it makes people more productive. I think broader ownership promotes growth because horses can haul more than human does, not because humans are more productive when they lead the horse. And so it's a different model for understanding growth. Now, there's an interesting proposition. If you let's look at this from the point of view of a conspiracy theory for a moment. And I happen to believe that ignorance is much more at play here than conspiracy.
Right.
But let's suppose that 1% who own 50% of the wealth in this country, and that's a rough approximation. Let's suppose that those people like the idea that they have the monopoly on capital acquisition, and that the only way poor and working people are going to be able to acquire capital is by working harder. Now, there's always a few that get through the barrier. Baseball players get through the barrier.
Rock stars.
Movie people, sort of, sometimes movie stars or directors. I don't know where the wealth comes from, but by and large, people do break the capital barrier. So a few is fine. They want to have capital ownership restricted to the rich. They'd love nothing more than a public debate that says the debate is between helping the rich get richer and let it trickle down, or having the government own things, the machines, or having a mix in the middle where we tax the rich and give to the poor. They would love that debate. The last debate they want to have is a debate that cuts poor people into the ownership process. So you start with that. So you've got a very secure private ownership central base, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, if you have a very secure private ownership central base, but you got to have some government spending, and you got to have some redistribution, because the system won't work without redistribution. You got to have you have to pay some people more pay for less work. You got to give some money for the people with disability. Everybody, you need a consumer letting them own. You got to have a consumer base. What's the best thing for the government to do? Best thing the government to do is to own public capital. What kind of public capital? War machinery. So even the right wing that pretends to be against Keynesian redistribution, the whole military-industrial complex is a big Keynesian redistribution system. We tax and borrow to create public ownership, mainly armies and bombs and the whole war machinery, so that you have a tiny elite owning most of the wealth, and you have a big protective machinery around that dominating the world, which is the second round. Now, there's a conspiracy theory. And binary economics cracks that conspiracy. At least it exposes it.
It exposes it.
It says that you're much better, you can create much more, you can create an alternative to a big public military by broadening ownership. And if every country broadens ownership, then countries don't need to invade one another, do they? They don't need to exploit one another. They don't need to subjugate one another as wealth spreads and broadens. So it could very well be, I think one of the things that Louis Kelso said one time is, and I think he's even written something about it, it's not published, he says the problem with American capitalism is they haven't figured out how to live without blood.
Wow.
And he was referring to the industrial complex.
And he felt the basis of that was lack of distributed capital ownership.
If we need government ownership, if we need government redistribution, a government purchaser, let it be for war machinery. You don't want the problem with making poor people a little bit richer is that they're going to bargain. They're going to get pickier on the kind of work they do.
Oh.
A person who's earning 15 or 20% of his income or her income from capital, which might be the case 10 or 15 years into a binary economy, is going to be more in a position to make the kind of moral choices that Richard wants people to make than a person who owns nothing. Now, that person may not do that, but at least ownership gives you the option, gives you the opportunity to be freer.
In other words, you're saying a lot of people are going to war because they don't have a choice for employment.
Most of the people who are over there in Iraq right now are there because they thought that this is a good way to have the government pay for their education. They got bamboozled.
Right.
If 50 years ago, instead of building the war machinery, when Kelso first proposed it, we had broader ownership, people wouldn't need to join the reserves to have their education.
Well, that goes back to when our country was supporting fascism.
Well, it does go back to that, and it still does. I think our country is
yeah.
A lot of fascist attitudes in our country today, unfortunately.
If you read this article I have, it said even after the New Deal, the rich people still own all the churches, the land, all the raw essentials for living. That the redistribution was just propaganda. That was just done because there were mass riots.
Well, there was a shakedown. Some rich people lost their fortunes, but I don't think others.
Yeah, but I'm sure they were saying, listen, if you don't give something back, we're going to be hanging from trees instead of the poor people because there's going to be such mass anger.
Well, they may have thought that. I think it's easier just to keep people deceived. And
That's part of the deceivement.
They continue under this notion that the broader distribution of ownership doesn't promote growth. Again, I think it's more ignorance than it is. I've described the conspiracy theory, and it may be that some people understand it.
Yeah, it's called the...
I think ignorance is the issue. That goes back to Paula's basic question.
Well, ignorance is a big money producer.
If ignorance
Very big money producer.
If ignorance is the problem, then it seems as knowledge comes, where it comes is going to be the solution, wherever it comes, whether it's in the minds of the rich or the poor.
I think both can happen. I think both can happen.
I think both needs to happen.
Excuse me. I do think that there is an efficiency to reach people who can set up institutions and influence institutions that can promote this idea.
You know what Frank Lloyd Wright said? He said in his frustration about wealthy clients, because he was an artist and he wanted to build beautiful houses, an architect, and he wanted to, you know, as all great artists do, he wants to reach beyond social convention. So he would say, the only thing more scared than $1 million is $2 million. So I think a lot of times people want to go along with the pack. And when you're introducing something that's so grand and sweeping, until you, like you say, wisely said last week, for a mere $5 million, you would have a school of binary economics. Once you have the school, then you could have sort of an anchor that people could have a reference point to.
I think that would be a major breakthrough. I've never been able to achieve that yet. But I do think that that's a major breakthrough. And Richard mentioned Martin Luther King and Gandhi. You know, one of the wonderful things about Martin Luther King and Gandhi is that he held people through their pretenses. He says, okay, you believe in equality, well, you believe in this, you believe in that. And that's what I think that, I mean, the American system is dedicated to a level playing field. You don't have a level playing field unless everybody can acquire capital with the earnings of capital. Yet the American system is dedicated to competition, but the poor people are not able to compete with the rich people for capital acquisition. We say we have the right to property, but most people cannot acquire the most important form of property, which is capital. In other words, we have a lot of pretenses. We have churches that say they're trying to help the least of these. That's Christian. That's what Jesus says. Help the least of these. But they're not doing it. We have left-wingers that are advocates for the poor, but they're not picking up the... we have people who are advocates for blacks, but they're not picking up this idea. I mean, to me, the breakthrough is in getting people who say they're for the goals of binary economics to understand that there's a new way of doing it. That's, to me, and again, I have little doubt that if I could talk to 50 people who have $50 million or more, and there are plenty more than 50 people who have that, I get all the money I need. Of course, those people, number one, don't believe there's a new idea they haven't heard of. It doesn't work. Number two,
because their advisors tell them no.
That's right. And number two, only a portion of those 50 people are truly generous. There are a lot of hypocrites among the rich, and as Richard says, among the poor, and I agree with him. If you made the poor rich,
so it would be 10 times worse than a rich person, I mean.
But there are some that are not.
They'd be
the problem
just as
with some
greedy.
that are honestly open to new ideas. The problem with those people is that they pay assistance to keep people like me away from them. That to me is the hugest irony of all. The hugest irony of all is that the people who rub their hands and say there must be a better way, in fact, they're paying people good salaries to keep the likes of me away from them. That to me is when I think about the bitterest pill of all, that's the one that really gets me.
Speaking about that bitter pill, how does your music help that bitterness? Because you were saying, because I edit the material and I listened to what I didn't hear the first time around, and you said about your sweet music. And when I listened to it, it's so beautiful. I wouldn't call it sweet, because there's something when you have real beauty, it embraces all of the flavors or the tastes. Mm-hmm. And there's something in the human experience that seems for great art, there's that space for the deep grief. And if you have, in your academic career, with all of your tremendous abilities and accomplishments, starting from Harvard, you were recognized, and you have found through decades that institutions set up to help the poor aren't listening, aren't paying attention, aren't helping other institutions to raise themselves up to start having the capacity. It's something so hard to bear. And yet the beauty of the music, to me, always reminds that hope is there. I mean... Well,
that's very deep. Beethoven's my hero in the composing department, and he wrote calming and centering and gives people strength and courage, keeps them with love and gentleness. I'm not one of those artists that believes that I should express my suffering in art. There's enough suffering in the world. I don't need to add that. And the people that I would most want to touch, for the most part, I don't think need to experience more of that. So it's different views. Some people believe that what your art ought to do is express your pain and your frustration. I respect that view, but my sense is that with my art, I want to make people feel better, not Pollyanna better, but feel a sense of hope and comfort, and that sort of thing.
No, but I know it's not. Let me express it another way. In Ayurvedic medicine, there's a way of healing that has to do with the elements, and they talk about taste: sweet, sour, salt, pungent, and astringent. And so when you described your music as sweet, and then I actually had the experience of listening, sweet is only one of the tastes. And the music actually embraced all of them, including that one which should only be 1/5, is the bitterness. And I think, this is the dimension that Richard's bringing here today. I mean, he's embraced that. He's talked about his brother, how he's gone to Vietnam. That's a part of our history that has been so poorly embraced, or embrace isn't the right word, processed,
it's not even talked
examined.
It's thrown in the garbage.
It's like
Never happened.
It's something unbalanced about our life today because we haven't understood that. We haven't processed it. And to me, great art doesn't mean dwelling on it, but it means acknowledging it. And to me, that's what I heard in your music. So that in that moment when I listened to it, I could have that space that starts to create that shift for that platform. And it's not even hopeful isn't the right word. Where something profoundly has reorganized itself. And you can go on and seemingly do the impossible. So like, for example, right here, Richard wanted me to show this, and this is something
Can you see that?
about the American people. And it says they're like sheep. Now, what gave a man like Kelso, who was, such a great attorney and usually had very, powerful clients, he wanted to empower sheep. How did he feel he could do that?
Oh, he was an amazing man, and he clearly wanted to empower people. I remember one time he said, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I should be doing in life. I'm here exactly why I was sent. He was a man with a mission, and to be in his presence, there was a sense of beatitude about him. There was a brilliance, and you walked into his office, and there was just a sense of this peace and holiness. He had that sense that he was doing something, and he had terrific courage. I think he expected that this would catch on in his lifetime, and I think the last couple of times I saw him shortly before his death, he had lost that hope, and it was palpable. Phones had stopped ringing, and the people that he knew in high places, many of them had passed away. But he never stopped believing in his idea. I don't know what makes him tick. I don't know what makes me tick. It is just my sense is this is what I need to be doing. The reason I don't write more music and spend time on music is that even if I were, the next Beethoven, which I'm not, but even if I were, we need binary economics more than we need, another set of beautiful melodies.
But I kind of think it can almost be the same thing. I think that those people who passed away now, those powerful friends that he was hoping, connections that would help shift this, maybe because it didn't happen, if we examine that, we'll see the abuses of a system, or let's say an unconsidered investments or moves or strategies, that if people see how critical this has now become, how close we are to annihilation precisely because of this. And when I say annihilation, I say it very specifically. I don't want to be overly bitter by obsessing on 9/11, but I think it's very important to really understand what happened and to understand the power of technology that can turn buildings into dust. And once that's understood, to say, do we want to keep going along a path that's going to, I mean, you know, on one hand you talk about being good to the poor, but the other side is being good to everybody on the planet.
Yes.
Now, I would include the Earth as a human entity.
I don't,
No, clean water, clean air. And there was a quote I think you would enjoy. I don't know if you heard of Joe Hill. He was a union organizer. He was shot in Utah by a firing squad and framed, but he said, before they shot him, he said, don't mourn, organize, moments before they killed him. So instead of that belief that working people shouldn't just lay down and be abused, it was a very powerful tool to organize and helping people even more. And then I'll add to that, there's a lot of journalists out there I listen to, but the most inspiring person I've ever heard is Mamiya Abu-Jamal, who was a Panther since he was 15 years old, and Minister of Information. And they said he never talks about himself when he does the interviews. He talks about other people. We said, how come he never talks about himself? Because he said that I'm here to help other people. I'm here to be a model because I'm here to serve the people. And some revolutionaries said, true revolutionaries do it out of love of people. And that's what I do. I listen to Mamiya, and I like to listen to that song that Joan Baez did at Woodstock where she sings Joe Hill. It's a beautiful song. If you ever heard it, you might want to listen to it. That's what I do when I think of my brother, you know.
can you imagine the working man not working anymore because he has capital?
I'm sure that's exactly what Joe Hill was talking about. Organize and make a better world and make sure everybody has what they need for the basic necessities to have a happy life. That's what I think.
So, in conclusion, Robert, do you have any?
Well, I just want to thank you both for this thoughtful interchange. I think that what Joe may not have understood is that the biggest abuse is excluding people from a very orderly and peaceful and non-redistributionary way of liberating themselves. The biggest evil that people don't know about is the fact that they are unnecessarily excluded from acquiring capital with the earnings of capital and then being able to earn by owning. And that's the potency that will liberate not only the individual but liberate our society from the need to engage in so many of the negative things that they're involved in right now.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and let me get this posted, and we'll stay tuned. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome,
Take
and
care.
thank you for your words.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. So there we are. Let me click this off here.